Have Leeds done enough in the transfer window to survive in the Premier League this season? And how do we fare against the other sides down around us? Looking ahead to the Nottingham Forest game as well, can Leeds get a much needed 3 points at Elland Road? We're joined by BBC and Don't Go to Bed Just Yet, Adam Pope, to have a little look back at Daniel Farke's comments and a look ahead to the Nottingham Forest game. Hey folks, welcome to the Leeds View podcast for our second podcast of the week. We do these twice a week along with daily Leeds United news, and we are now part of the Sports Social Podcasting Network. If this is your kind of thing, you can give us a follow, a channel rating on the audios, as well as a like and a subscribe on YouTube. And we are delighted to be joined by BBC's Adam Pope to have a little bit of a look back of the standard January transfer window for Leeds United at this point, and a little bit of look ahead to where Leeds will be, hopefully, come the end of the season. Adam, thanks for taking time out of your day to have a chat with us. Another massively eventful 2-hour deadline day live stream over on the BBC as well as here.
Yeah. I've got to be honest, Jay, I wasn't expecting much from the window in terms of activity, if I'm being honest. Sort of trying to get a read on it in December ahead of the January. I think the steer was that I could envisage, or we could envisage, maybe a couple of loans coming in. Obviously, one did. I wasn't even expecting the sort of chase for a big money signing, which Strand Larsen was, certainly for Palace anyway. But when that came about, clearly there was a lot of commotion's not the right word, but it created a lot of interest in a stir, and that almost became like the biggest thing in the transfer window, didn't it? So, but ultimately, yeah, we went into that show, that deadline show, thinking there's not going to be too much. And, unless something mad happened, which nearly did with Strand Larsen, I suppose, then, yeah, I wasn't expecting too much. But what I was expecting was probably the head loss from quite a large section of fans. Yeah, so from my point of view, it's about right. And I would say this, yeah, and this is where I do agree a lot with Daniel Farke. And I just listened back to his press conference again yesterday. If you're doing a lot of business in January, there's something not right. And I do fundamentally agree with that.
Yeah, it was, I think if you take the comments from the summer and then put them together with the comments in January, you get a kind of a clear picture of what the goal was. I mean, Robbie Evans said at the end of the summer window, ideally, we don't want to do any business in January if we can avoid it. When Anote was a player they wanted in the summer. So it felt like they were just finishing off the business from the summer by getting him in. Jack Harrison goes out. But outside that, unless, as Daniel Farke worded it, a special player became available and a certain player. And I think that's probably where the mix-ups come from a lot of the fan base of going, well, if you've £40 million to throw around on Strand Larsen, why not go and get something else? But the detail that appears to have come out in the last couple of days is Leeds went in with a loan offer with an obligation at the end of the season to try and get him. And then Palace obviously come in with cash up front, and that's why it goes away. But Leeds saw Strand Larsen as a longer-term option, a market opportunity, as they worded it, and that's why they went for him particularly and not anybody else. And Farke is kind of happy, but he seems happy now, Adam, with what he's got based on yesterday's comments. But his comments in the week before maybe indicated he might want somebody else. But yesterday seems very much of a planting my flag on the ground of this is where we are, we're happy with what we got, and we go forward now.
Yeah, I think that was really interesting. You make that point, Jer, because yesterday it was like a very corporate sort of executive type speak, wasn't it? It was like, look, I know my place. I'm here to serve. I think was his words, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We work as in a collaborative format with everybody, the board, with Robbie Evans, with the rest of the recruitment team and the medical staff in looking at profiles and deciding whether this is going to work. He did admit there is some controversy at times, which I presume he means sort of conflict as to, I want this and you don't want this and what have you. So that was quite conciliatory, I thought, to the process. And I think that's his way of saying, right, we're at an end now. I can't do anything. This is my players. I'm not going to talk about the ones that I might have had or could have had, etc., because that's disrespectful to these players who I've got to keep motivated to the end of the season. I get that. That's quite clever as a football executive, I would suggest. However, it was clear, wasn't it? The prior press conference post-Arsenal, after Carl Darlow had made a mistake by his own admission for the second goal, and this is on the back of Perry's poor form, that in the main presser, which unusually was done before I did my one-on-one with him, he sort of was talked about telling the board or saying that the board know what I want. And I think that was in specific answer to the goalkeeping scenario. I asked him about Carl Darlow and what had gone on. And yeah, he admitted it was, he couldn't hide from it. He didn't go as far as to admit that we need a keeper, but weirdly, it was something, we mentioned that we did a live podcast
He didn't say we didn't need a goalkeeper. I think that's the part of it where he could have said, I'm very happy with my goalkeeper, and he didn't say that.
Yeah, well, I think that's it. So it was clear that it is an issue, and it's become a bit of more of an issue. I've always felt Darlow was unlucky not to start the season. I really did, and I don't think Perry's any better. I felt Darlow was the better keeper. Yes, there's been some high-profile errors from both keepers to the extent where there's probably not too much between them right now. There's some of the parts, probably enough to keep Leeds in the Premier League. But there's been a significant amount of mistakes to suggest that it might have been prudent to go and get a goalkeeper. And I'd say this, if that was one position, the left side was one position he mentioned a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, the striker position was one with Strand Larsen. Then my question yesterday was, if you weren't getting Strand Larsen, was there not the flexibility to move those funds into another target if required? Because there's no way that target would have cost as much, would they? Strikers cost the most money. So, and he sort of deflected off and said, no, it wasn't the case of that. And I know it's not as simple as suddenly going, right, let's get target number 3 as for our, for our left side, or target number 1 for our goalkeeper. I get that. But I just wonder if there could have been something done late on to maybe facilitate one of those other places he needed filling in. But overall, I think he is quite pleased, because as you say, they've just elongated the summer transfer window, haven't they, by getting Buonanotte in?
Yeah, and those other questions are there. I think had the news around James Justin's potential injury not been good news yesterday, I think that we might have seen them go after a left back. You see Luca Netz go to Forest for £4 million, and he's a player Leeds looked at before, and he's a promising player. Farke knows him quite well from Borussia Mönchengladbach. So you think there is money available, even with the Harry Wilson money from the summer, that you could potentially get that if needed. But if Justin's fine and if Gabby Goodmunson is fine, then why bring in another fullback? But the issue will be, and I think I said it the other night when I was on Sky Sports about it, the season will have an if bracketed around it now of if Calvert-Lewin stays fit, because Lucas Metch has been injured on and off over the season, and if we don't get a left and a right fullback injury problem, we could be okay. We should have enough. But you do have that if stuck to it, and you think if it goes wrong, another if, they will look back and say, well, why didn't you do it? And again, as the square ball said this week, why didn't you repair the roof while it was sunny and do it then? Why leave it to chance? But if it goes the other way, like it did last January, then there'd be a smart window.
Well, I would say last January I felt was more of a risk not spending than this one. They were very cool about last January's window. They felt they had enough. The club didn't feel it was taking a risk. And you can put it this way, not buying a player or actively not buying a player is as much a decision as buying a player in some ways, unless you've got no money whatsoever. But clearly there were funds available. And I think they do put a lot of store in the medical staff. He called them Champions League level, didn't he, just the other week? And but if you get a horrific injury like an ACL or something, it doesn't matter how good you are, and how good your healing hands are. That's not going to do it. It is the risk that you run, and I think it is a tight line, to be honest. But I just feel more comfortable that they're going about it this way than if they had paid the same amount of money, for example, as Palace have been willing to go to for, and they're cash rich, as we know, because of the sales that they've made, to go for Strand Larsen, who have not been that impressed with this season and has had a few injury worries too. And I'm not so sure about a player that, according to some Wolves fans, is down tools a little bit, or appears to have down tools a bit this season. So I'm comfortable that they've made the right choice there. But I do empathise massively with people. We need more. Forest have strengthened, or let's say this: Forest have brought players in, West Ham have brought players in, and Burnley have brought James Ward-Prowse in. Well, I'm not concerned about Burnley at this point. I'm really not. And then I look around, Bournemouth have gone and spent money, haven't they? Look like, was it 25 million on Raya? And Palace obviously have gone and spent money despite not having Mateta available anymore because he's going to obviously have some surgery or whatever. So that is a concern. But generally, I look around, I don't feel like the immediate opponents or the rivals have strengthened so much so that Leeds are in their wake. That's my belief.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because it is a case of, well, you don't just sign for the sake of signing. You sign if you can make your squad stronger or if you can give yourself more options. That's the logical way of doing it. But if you look at Nottingham Forest, who already have a very chunky squad at present, Luca Netz, but Sean Dyche has described them as one for the future. They've brought in Lorenzo Luca, who from Andrea Russo, who I speak to in Italy, has said has his own set of disciplinary issues over there. And not only were they happy to see him leave the club, they were happy to see him leave the country. So, wow. He's coming into, and Sean Dyche can be prickly. So you don't know how that's going to work out between the two. But Stefan Ortega looks like a smart move, but he is essentially their first choice goalkeeper now over the age of 29 they brought in. And then you look at West Ham, Tati Castellanos looks like a decent player on paper. Pablo Felipe left has to be proven whether he can do it in the Premier League. And then Adama Traore, who I'm not sure anybody else from a Leeds perspective would have been like, that's a player worth getting. And then Axel Disasi, who wasn't registered by Chelsea at the start of the year and has only played on 21 football. They've lost Igor Julio and they've got Todibo out injured now. Oh, sorry, it's suspended for a couple of weeks. So when you look at that, you think there's not a huge amount of growth in there in getting better in those sides. And Crystal Palace has spent the better part of £100 million on 3 players. And if it doesn't go well for them and if they continue to drop, they could be in trouble in the summer. So maybe Leeds made the right decision to hold as we are. We've got a stable dressing room. Yeah, we could have made it a little bit more comfortable, but it still feels quite calm around Leeds compared to the other clubs.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Look, I know fans might be losing their heads a little bit, but in terms of you look at the clubs, you look at the head loss that's gone on at West Ham particularly, and I think Palace are in that sort of arena now as well. And I think when you look at those players that you mentioned, particularly Castellanos for West, they've not scored many goals. Luca not scored many goals. When you look at it, and they come with issues, as you say, or certainly in Luca's case. So in that sense, I'm thinking, yeah, they're not guaranteed to go and get 5 or 6 goals, those players now, by the end of the season. I know you can say that about any player, but they're coming into a league that they don't really know, and they're in a fight. They're in a massive fight as well. So yeah, I think Leeds does feel calm, and genuinely, I mean that. I've not known it this calm for such a sustained period of time in the 20 years that I've been covering it. And the plan seems to be working. The 2 points, if you like, sort of ahead of schedule, aren't they, Jeff, at the moment? I know the goal difference took a bit of a battering, but yeah, overall, I'm still comfortable. Yes, you've got to the 2 outliers, the 2 Arsenal results with the 9 goals with none against. Other than that, it looks a pretty decent record for a side that's lower down in the Premier League. And I don't get the sense, that this game against Forest, they're going into any sense of having their confidence bashed at all.
Yeah, I think we described it after the game against Arsenal. Just get this out of the system as quick as you can and move on. It was never going to be a deciding factor. It's not great to lose the way you lose, but ultimately move on. They're the best side in Europe and the best side in the Premier League right now. Just get away from it. And if you take the results against them out of the equation, Leeds' goal difference is -2, which isn't bad when you again take those 2 out of isolation. But yeah, I think there was a couple of little niggles moving ahead and looking at the rest of the season. I think the second half against Everton, I think people started to see, maybe are we starting to revert to type from the first part of the season where we sat on the edge of the 18-yard line and didn't try and push on. And then you look at the Arsenal game straight afterwards and you're thinking, conceding a lot of crosses here again. Are we starting to see some of the older bad traits slip back in? But you couldn't have a better game than against Nottingham Forest under the lights on Friday night to get that out of your system and put a marker down, because despite the result against Arsenal, we're not really worse off than we were in the table. Still have a 6-point gap to West Ham with a better goal difference. And if you look at what Leeds have to do, as Daniel Farke put it yesterday, 14 games left, 4 wins and 3 draws will do it. That'll get you to 41 points. It's still very much in Leeds' hands.
Oh, absolutely. And I think also, although just going back on the points you made there, the Everton game, really good first half. I thought Everton were dire actually first half. Second half, yeah, Everton, because of Dewsbury Hall mainly, got back into it. I just felt the last 5 minutes, though, once Leeds sort of threw a bit back at Everton. And I think we saw, I'd love to know your opinion on this, Buonanotte, who we've now seen, 2 little spells. There's something there about him. Give us something a bit different in between the lines there. So I think that rescued that half for me. I know they drew 1-1 in the end, but they almost, I thought, conjured up something at the end. Did Leeds. A couple of corners. He looked quite threatening. Again, we saw something against Arsenal when he came on that he could turn a game Leeds' way. So that's where I think there's an improvement in the squad. that makes it in a tight game, he could be something that turns it Leeds' way. So that's good. So I take something from that game. The Arsenal game, I felt look, they performed better than they did down there. I know it was still a big scoreline. The other thing I take as well going into this Forest game is that we spoke to Ethan Ampadu yesterday, and there is that element of a bit of revenge. He's very calm and measured. He doesn't say anything too rash, but there is a sense of being, wanting a bit back for what happened down at the City ground, which was probably the worst point of the season, really, there in the Brighton game. I don't know what you think, Jay, but
yeah.
So that's very much in the man, and they've got this. They totally get the tension or the nerves or the excitement about this game, and on a Friday night where they've been really good, haven't they? In terms, I don't think it's got any bearing at all on it, but I think they've won all 4 games where they've played under the lights. So I just find these things that even in the bad stuff that's gone on in a couple of games, or the poor stuff, that there's still some positives to take out of it. And sitting with the captain yesterday, you can definitely tell that they have got this right in their grasp. They understand exactly what's required in this game, and no fear, and ready to stamp their authority on it as well. So I'm feeling quietly confident about it.
Yeah, there seems to be a difference in this Leeds United squad than the squad that went down a few years ago, where when the pressure's on this side, you look at the Chelsea, Liverpool, Manchester City games specifically, they seem to like that pressure, and they seem to nearly perform better under that pressure than when the pressure's maybe off a little bit. When you go back to the side a couple of years ago, when the pressure came on, they completely buckled and couldn't handle that. Whereas, and again, the reaction from the fan base in Ellen Road will suggest that as well. Even when we're getting beaten by Arsenal, the fans are still singing at the top of their lungs and backing the side, where a couple of years ago, not so much, because this didn't feel the effort was maybe there from the side. But they definitely look like they got the bit between their teeth when the pressure's on a little bit more. And this will be a perfect opportunity. I agree with you on Buonanotte as well. I think he adds another player like Brendan Aronson who can take the ball in the half turn and push forward and try and be a bit more aggressive at attacking if Leeds have been sitting in for a little bit. And I think I used Joe Rothwell as an example last year. You're just looking for someone to get on the ball and go forward with it. And I think Buonanotte is probably that player as well. So I think you've got that little bit of impetus there that's needed. So yeah, would love to see them on the pitch a little bit earlier. I think going on 85 minutes isn't giving them the best of opportunities. I think 70, 75, probably best. I don't think we do particularly well when we sit back and try and defend Leeds. So I think it's better to go forward and be aggressive. But we still got a point out of that game, and we're still moving forward. And as long as we pick up a single point away from home in the rest of the games, and we get a couple of 3 points at home, Leeds will be in the Premier League next season. So yeah, it's interesting. You made the point about the worst point of Leeds season being Nottingham Forest and Brighton. It definitely was. It was 2 of the poor performances that we put in. It was the last time we saw the 4-3-3 system as a starting formation, and since then we've moved to the 3 at the back, and it's been very successful. This would be a real indicator of whether Leeds have really turned the corner against this side, because this will be the measuring stick to say, well, can we beat these now and repair that initial result? And if you can beat a relegation rival, which Forest at this point still are, it puts pressure on everybody else down there, and you're running out of games as well. So the more, as I say, there's 14 games left, 4 wins and 3 draws. We'll definitely do it. Daniel Farke reckons 6 results. But if you keep picking up points, it puts a different level of pressure on the likes of West Ham and Forest.
Yeah, and if it goes well against Forest, clearly West Ham start at Burnley 9 points behind Leeds, and obviously still 6 points behind Forest. So yeah, it puts on a huge amount of pressure. But I think also that the pressure on this game also becomes, because is it fair or is it more likely that Leeds are going to get as good a set results against, say, Man City again, go one better against Villa than they did last time, say, and with the difficult games coming after this one, is it fair to expect they could have another good run like that, with Chelsea away in midweek? Chelsea obviously better than they were when they came to Ellen Road recently. So that for me puts the pressure on this game even more, because I'm just not expecting anywhere near a replication of the same points haul. I think it'd be foolish to do that. So there is a lot of pressure. But I totally agree with you. I think this set of players, even if they go behind, like we saw against Liverpool, where they would go 1-2 down very quick, they come back, they don't give up, and everybody stays with them. So yeah, I'm still confident that it will turn out all right. I'm confident that they will perform and give everything that's required, because and what I really love about them as well is that he's obviously worked on several systems and styles, because they've managed to interchange quite quickly, even within games, yeah. And I know you're keen on this stuff as well, but yeah, the tactical switches in games have been really effective at times, haven't they? And sometimes he has gone back to the 4-3-3, hasn't he, within a game, just to see it over the line. So I'm confident he'll have a system that will it'll come up with, or he'll adapt in game in time to combat Nottingham Forest, which I think at the time when we went to Brighton, where they looked like they'd won a ticket to be in the Premier League, when they went to Forest, and although taking the lead, it was really poor in the end. You were just getting fed up with seeing the same old. I don't think you can't level that anymore.
No, I think that's been the big point. We talked about it around that time as well, and we exchanged a few texts back and forward about it. And we were saying at that time, what I was saying at that time, it was predictable. We knew what the team was going to be. We knew what the lineup was going to be. We knew when the subs were going to come on. We knew what the subs, and if we could predict that, then sports analysts at other clubs could very easily pick holes in that. But since that Manchester City game, I don't know what his base formation is going to be. I don't know what his starting 11 is. I can have a guess at it, but there's always one or two, which means the opposition are guessing as well as to what we're doing, and that gives you a little bit of a tactical advantage going into the game. And then he's shown huge tactical flexibility in matches to change it when it's needed as well, which is great. And it shows self-awareness and it shows growth, and all that stuff is fantastic. And we're exactly where we probably need to be at this stage. And you're right in those results. The games coming up, Chelsea, Villa, and Man City back to back are going to be 3 games we could theoretically get nothing from. So getting a couple of results, getting 3 points against Forest becomes really, really important. But I think if I'm looking at the results he needs to get the points from, or the games he needs to get the points from, it's Forest at home, Sunderland at home, Burnley, Wolves. Yeah. They're games that are absolutely winnable at home. And then you go away to West Ham on the final day of the season. But you've got Bournemouth away, you could get a point there. Crystal Palace away, you could get a point there. And then that's enough. You're over the line. You've picked them up there. So you can still afford probably to lose 7 games in there and that last 14 and still have enough to easily get across the line, assuming everything goes their way outside of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I've looked at those and I thought, okay, yeah, they're likely maybe to do that. Yeah, chuck a road one in somewhere. Obviously, they lost at Burnley. This, there'll be something mad, won't there? Something for everybody to have their nails bitten. I thought it was interesting yesterday as well, as we're coming into this series of games. Now, the squad is what it is now, too. And yes, we're always going to have that little worry about the injury situation because of the nature of the players that have been bought. But I misheard what he said yesterday. I don't know if you caught it in the press. And I said, oh, so you're saying we're stronger, Leeds are stronger in the window. And he said, nah. He said, no, that's not what I said. And the exact words were, I need to just check, he said, we are not weaker. Yeah. And I thought that was quite, going back to the point you were making before about how he spoke yesterday and how he spoke maybe a week ago. I thought that was quite telling. And eventually he said, we are potentially stronger if Buonanotte gets up to speed, but he has to walk through the door. I thought that was quite telling, really. So they're not weaker, but they've stayed neutral, I would say, at this stage, with the potential to be a bit better. Is that going to be enough? Yes, I do think it will be enough personally, but I don't know. It was just a subtle thing that he pointed out yesterday.
I think there's always a few things with Daniel Farke. We do press conference reactions over on our other channel on bigup.com, and I always like to say, if Daniel Farke is asked a specific question a couple of different ways during a press conference, he'll give you little breadcrumbs in each of them, and you can kind of piece together what he really feels about the situation. And sometimes he says an awful lot by not saying anything on certain questions. So he does leave nuggets out there to be picked up. But I of all the press conferences he's done yesterday, felt very much to me like a line in the sand, and this is where we go. And I quite liked it. I thought it was a positive way to move forward. And if I'm a player in his current squad, listening to what he said yesterday, I'm like, yeah, let's go and we can do this. Because as he said, this squad has got us 26 points so far this season, and we had a massive hiccup in the middle of that first half. So why not be good enough to go and get us what we need to get over the line? Adam, you think we'll be fine? Where's your head at going into the Forest game? How do you think that's going to pan out?
Yeah, I've tried to study all the near rivals in terms of what they've done recruitment wise, and I look where's the difference going to be made? Probably in the final third, isn't it? As opposed at this stage. So, and I'm thinking, okay, and I think for the reasons that you pointed out, I'm not convinced they've added a spectacular signing. I think if Leeds had got Strand Larsen, I think that would have been a bit of a difference maker. However, and I think Farke pointed this out as well, they have some great players, Hudson-Odoi, Gibbs White. Yeah. So I think if they're on it, then it could be a tough time for Leeds. But I am genuinely confident. I think if Biel's back, I think that's a big thing. And I think he made a good point. He made a big point about saying, look, he's got a chance. because I think the difference between him and Bornau is quite significant.
Yep.
To be honest, I think he'll stick with Darlow at this point. I think he sort of has to, really. But having James Justin just a bit bruised, and I think he's been immense. I think I can't overstate his value, whether it's been right side, centre back, or left side. I think he's been for £8 million. Yeah, I think he's been phenomenal. I really do. So I think with the options that he's got now, obviously stat missing, I'd like to see Longstaff in there probably.
Same.
I think that experience for a game like this, plus he's got a bit of nastiness about him.
Yeah,
he has, hasn't he? Definitely.
Yeah.
And obviously, we're not going to have the Metcha DCL situation just yet.
Shame, really.
I'd like that at some point this season, but that's going to happen tomorrow. So I would imagine he'd stick with Aronson in supporting DCL as opposed to, unless he does go Okafor. But that's what I see tomorrow. And I just think it could be those sort of understated players like your Longstaffs that could be the difference tomorrow, just to cope with what Forest might have. So I'm quite confident. Points not dreadful, but it's got to be they've got to go for this one and just try and break the back of West Ham and/or Forest, but particularly West Ham by winning this one.
Yeah, it's probably a point's probably a better result for Forest than it is for us looking at their games coming up as well. But it's important not to lose games at this point and try and pick up the wins where you can, because you never know. Burnley were very poor against Sunderland, but you never know what West Ham will face when they go there. Last thing to ask you, Adam, just while we're on strikers, because I agree with you. I'd love to see Lucas Metcha and DCL up front together. I thought that was our best partnership. I thought we looked at our absolute flowing best in that game with two people to aim at in that game as well. Farke doesn't seem to want to go with the two outside of if Metcha is fully fit and available. Joel Piroe is the obvious question. Didn't leave in the January window. Didn't want to go. Club haven't pushed anybody out the door. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing in terms of PSR and having money available remains to be seen. But do you see him having any impact in the second half of this season? Because we all said last year, Piroe's probably better in a 2. And here's Leeds having played a 2 this year and no sign of Joel Piroe. No.
So how is that going to change? The only way, and he's so different to Aronson, isn't he? And you're thinking if Aronson drops off, then he's going to put Buonanotte in there. Yeah. I would imagine. It's almost to the point, Jer, with Piroe, when I look at him that it's going to require an injury for him to play. And which is not great.
Don't say that, yeah. Don't need that.
It's so hard to see where it fits in. Personally, I'm glad that he stayed, because I still think there is a role for him, or he's still going to have an impact. We almost saw against Man United, and he first touch bends it onto the top of the net. And you think, he's got that in his locker to go and change the game. I think he had another shot that was blocked as well. And
Spurs
link-up play. Spurs, yeah, exactly. So he's got good link-up play. He's got a nice touch. And I think from his personal point of view, with Suriname being his option now, I think just staying at a Premier League club's been a good thing for him. Although I must admit, I think if that Rangers stuff was true, I would imagine that would have been quite tempting. Yeah. But he wants to stay. And every time I've spoken to him, which hasn't been much this season, he was so desperate to stay and score a Premier League goal. So I think there's going to be a moment for him, but I don't know if there's going to be, a long stretch of game time for him, but I think there'll be a moment for him. So I'm glad that he's there, but I'm racking my brains to think how it's going to work. Unless you're chasing the game, and which he has done sometimes, and you throw them all on. But as a part of the structure, it really is beyond me to think where can I see him starting a game this season? Right now, no.
Again, as you say, unless we get injuries, and that's a different problem, because if DCL and Metcha are both injured, and he does have to play, Leeds have to change their entire approach to get the best out of him, which would be a proper problem. Adam, massive thanks, as always, for popping in, having the chat with us. Really, really appreciate it. We'll see how it all pans out. Fingers crossed it goes well. I'm at the game on Friday night as well. I'm flying over tomorrow morning to
brilliant
see the game. So, I'm looking forward to it. Fingers crossed. I haven't seen a defeat in my last 3 visits, so fingers crossed that continues tomorrow night as well, and we can get over the line. Adam, thanks very much, folks. You can check Adam out on Don't Go to Bed Just Yet podcast, which will link down below the last episode. And you can obviously get him on BBC and all their stuff that they do there as well. Adam, appreciate your time. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, yeah. Safe journey.